Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our Government of Canada M365 Council meeting. You may have joined us at the beginning of November when we had Microsoft presenting to the group. With December and the holidays coming around the corner, we decided to double up for November, do a second November council meeting so we could give everyone some time to wrap things up and start their holidays in December. We have a great presentation set up for us today from PSPC. I'll be introducing the speakers shortly. JF, next slide. So I'm Sylvana Gatto, I'm the sales director here at Orangutech. I know a lot of you have been joining these council meetings for a while now and are familiar with Orangutech. But for those of you who aren't, we're a Microsoft partner here in Ottawa, and we work day in, day out with Government of Canada clients working on digital workplace, user adoption, and IM strategies and implementations for our Government of Canada clients. Next slide. So I know a lot of you have been joining these council meetings for several years. This is actually our fourth season, fourth year hosting these council meetings. And when we first started, I always tell the journey of it was new. M365 was new. Departments were just looking at what this was going to mean for the transformation of their department. So we were talking roadmaps, we were talking implementation plans, and then we moved into departments talking about their implementations, talking about challenges, lessons learned, successes. We've dove deep into change management, into the technologies, into the different licensing models. We've dove into security. So every department that comes and presents really brings their own view, their own perspective to what M365 means for their department and their implementation specifically that they can share with others. So it's really, really great to have these meetings continue month after month. I was actually just sharing with Amy at the beginning before we jumped on here how this community, yes, Orangutech has put together this platform, but it's really fueled by all of you who continue to come month after month, who choose to, ask questions, participate, present. So I know Barry Doucette, the CEO here at Orangutech, sent out an email earlier this fall asking for people to, put their hand up to present at this upcoming council meetings, to maybe nominate someone at their department. And I'd love to keep that going. You guys are really, really what fuel these meetings. And it's amazing to have PSPC here today presenting for the first time. And I'd love to see a few of you out there who I know keep coming every month. Come and present from your perspective, because you might think that, people have heard it. We've been there, we've done that, but it's not true. There's a reason why there's always 100, 130 people showing up. So I would love to have you guys follow up with Eric, with Barry after today's meeting, and let's get a lineup started for next calendar year. Next slide, Jeff. Thank you. So this is a Teams Live event, as all of you know. There will be a question period at the end of today's presentation. If you are familiar, there's a question box where you can ask all of your questions. Please use your name. Anonymous questions may or may not be asked during the question period. If you see a question that someone else has asked that you like, that you're curious about, like it, you have the ability to like it. And typically I will ask the questions that have the most likes first, because that's obviously where the interest is for this presentation. Did I cover all of that? Yeah, so like I said, there will be no presentation in December. We will be picking up again at the end of January 2022. I know that this is a highly anticipated presentation for today, maybe a little bit of a controversial title, The Ugly Duckling Waiting to Become a Swan. I know we got a lot of comments about that title, which I absolutely love. Coming into today. So I want to pass things over to JF Lalonde, DG of Technology Services and Support, and Amy Refuse, Director of Digital Evolution at PSPC. Over to you guys.
Thank you very much. Great intro. And yes, the title was my idea. Hopefully it doesn't insult anyone. It does create a bit of sort of a bit of a buzz. When Barry came to talk to me to make a presentation, I was like, oh, I didn't really feel like making a presentation, to be quite honest. I was like, I didn't want to go out in front of an audience and sort of talk about all the great things that we've done and how fantastic the world is and basically paint what I think is a fake picture. So I told Barry, I said, if you want me to go and present to a community of practice on 365, I want to talk about the real things, the raw truth, what really happened and what's really happening today and some of the pain that we're feeling. So I thought that would be a more interesting discussions because I think there's a lot of departments out there and organizations out there that are struggling, frankly, with 365. And this presentation is for you. Just let you know that you're not alone. You didn't go through hell and back by alone. We all went through the same kind of pain, and so this is a bit of a sympathy deck that to basically hopefully advocate for you and to recognize the pain that you probably went through, and that there were no perfect iterations of this product in the way it was implemented, in the speed in which it was implemented. With that said, before I do get into the slides, as we did put this deck together, Amy, who is my director, who was really sort of the strength behind this entire implementation, just recently said, well, maybe we were a bit too negative. So Amy will be probably counterbalancing some of the ugliness with some of the beauty as well of things that we actually did accomplish. So it wasn't all bad, and you'll see the way that the deck is constructed as we talk. We start with the utopia of what it was supposed to be, where our journey, which was quite a bumpy road, but that in the end the swan is where we believe that we can achieve over the next period of time. So let me just hop right into it. So the Swan Utopia. So what was the promise, or what is the promise? So we have these clouds, a seamless, feature-rich platform for collaboration, bringing a community together in a seamless way to generate value and content in a manner that has never been done before. A reduction of resources, because now through 365, you're supposed to be able to automate everything. Everything becomes driven by BI and so on and so forth. So, basically one FTE or one resource can do 10 times more than they could before. You can truly work from anywhere, anytime, access any resource 24/7. You can predict exactly how much this platform is going to cost, how much each resource costs, and so on and so forth. And it is 100% secure and reliable. No dangers of any breach of whatsoever. Full solid information management and so on and so forth. Information security. There's nothing going on in the US whatsoever. That's the promise. That's the utopia. In reality, it didn't quite turn out to be that way at the very beginning. Arguably, I think we are moving in that direction, but at the very beginning, it didn't quite feel that way. It was very bumpy. So in the case of PSPC, we've been keeping an eye on 365 for quite some time, far predating COVID. And then when COVID arrived, obviously chaos broke out, and the GC as an organization, as an enterprise, wasn't sure exactly where to go. Some departments had their own tenants. SSE stood up a GC collaboration. We were sort of 1 foot into a small little tenant, a PSPC tenant that we were experimenting with. And then there was this whole GC collaboration space, which was hosted in the US. So beginning of our chaos was, we didn't know what direction to go. We decided to go full bore into the GC collaboration because we felt our tenant wasn't ready. And then so we started to implement sort of like a half-baked baby literally 2 months later, we decided, no, this was not the direction we wanted to go because it was E5, whereas we were in E3, sort of our end state was going to be E3. So we basically completely scuttled that. So half of the people, basically half 19,000 employees at PSPC who had fully migrated onto GC collaboration, overnight we shut them down and we moved them over to, and then we instantiated a tenant, our actual E3 permanent end state tenant in one shot, and then tried to migrate everybody in through this very small hole into our tenant. And so basically, you can just imagine it was chaos. So in August 2020, we actually did activate the PSPC tenant, shut down the GC collaboration in September, and moved everybody from the GC collaboration over to the PSPC tenant, which was quite a feat and quite a nightmare, frankly. And the other thing is because the PSPC tenant had been was considered somewhat of a legacy in the sense that we had started 365 so early that most of our applications, most of our holdings, actually 3/4 of our actual tenant was actually still in the United States. So while new people who instantiated new tenants, who had not done pre-work, actually had their entire tenant stood up in Canada. In our case, half of our tenant teams, for example, was mostly hosted in the US. So essentially in the late fall, early winter, we actually had to migrate yet again from the American data center over to the Canada data center so that we can actually get our protected B status. So that added another degree of chaos to an already stressful and crazy environment. And then, of course, PSPC, we are the enterprise service provider for GC Docs. I don't want to go too much into the details about that because that's an interesting debate happening across the GC. Be that as it may, we do eat our own dog food, and we are very much a GC Docs environment. And so trying to figure out how basically the 365 platform interops with the EDRMS GC Docs has been quite a journey onto itself, and I could probably write a book on that, just on that alone. So, and right now we do not have any we have connectors for the traditional Office products, but for the other suite, so things like Teams and SharePoint and other things, like we don't have the right connectors for that. So that continues to be a challenge in that space, and we don't know where we're going as a GC in terms of a direction. So again, I don't want to dive in too deeply there. So the rest of the deck basically is just it's a series of challenges that we sort of distilled down to 7 slides, talking about some basically 7 dimensions, if you want, of areas that we really sort of struggled with, and so to a certain extent continue to struggle with. And I'm sure there's people out there in the audience today that this will resonate with, and others perhaps not. But I thought I would just sort of talk a little bit about our ugly duckling, again in show of solidarity and sympathy. So again, the first one was just the overall M365 pain, which I've kind of described a little bit, where each individual department, because the implementation of 365 happened so quickly because COVID, from one day to the next was upon us. People were evicted from their buildings, had to work from home, needed a tool to basically connect to knit the communities back together. 365 was the solution. Again, we had the GC collaboration, then the migration over to the 365 tenant belonging to each respective department. But there is very little in terms of collective knowledge, collective wisdom, collective common practices in how to do this. So every department was on their own trying to figure this out, how to basically explain to their myriad of end users who were perhaps not as tech savvy as the IT organizations, and try to get them to adopt this entirely new set of technologies. So that was basically ugly duckling challenge number 1. And what we did about it, I will turn over to my esteemed colleague and very old friend, Amy Rafuse, and that's what we're going to do. We're going to tag team, and she'll talk about what we did to address this particular challenge and what our journey is thus far. So Amy, what did we do about challenge number 1?
So first of all, JF, you've known me for a long time, but I'm not old. Yeah, thanks, JF. So what did we do? So, it's interesting. Before we kicked off this meeting and we were talking, one of the reasons that this forum was set up is to create those connections between departments who are experiencing similar things. And when we first got into GC collaboration at PSPC, and as we moved through M365, there were so many different types of change and questions that we had. We were in the cloud, but there was still a desktop component. We were doing a technical change. We were changing roles and responsibilities, more on this later. But there were so many kind of new things that we were paving the way for, not the least of which were things like, how do we get users up to speed? How do we give them the documentation that we need? How do we figure out how to do this? And so what we found out is that, and again, these are my observations, is that IT people like to do the technical change and we do it well. And that tends to be the easier part that we have to do, because in this case, the features were there, the environment was there, the tools were there. But what was really hard was trying to figure out some of these things that the changes brought about. And there really wasn't any forum to explore and to share ideas and how different departments were handling things. SSC, rightly so, were very focused on the technical. They set up the forum that we have is still going today. But there were so many other aspects, like, for example, how are we managing this in terms of a project? What are the business justifications, the drivers that we're using for all of the governance processes that we have to follow? What are we doing for change management? How are we dealing with security? So what are we doing with the internal roles and responsibilities that are changing in our IT shops? And so, personally, I found it difficult, and the team found it very difficult to reach out to each of the 40 some departments and get the right people to talk about the right thing in order to even share what we were doing, let alone what we had. The optimum there, the Swan would have been, let's chunk this up. If somebody other department is doing a video on how to use live events or webinar features, why don't we do it once for the GoC? So there are different levels of how we can share the M365 pane. And where do we really need to go? Again, making use of things like our communities, GC Exchange when it gets up and running, the forums that SSC is running. I'm sure that there's many ways that we can reach out and really come together as a GoC, as an enterprise, to be, where there are common aspects, let's take advantage of it and let's really make our resources available to everyone. Let's talk about different subjects, because really, different people have to be involved in those conversations, because in many of our teams, you've got folks who are responsible for these various aspects. And let's set up the platform for that collaboration and sharing and more of the work groups. And, big shout out to Remy Mark. I don't know if he's on here from ESDC. There are many people with Remy and I who have reached out across the organizations, and we definitely, we want to add to that complement of people who are interested in sort of making this stuff available and learning from what other departments and other organizations have done.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. And we internally, we also created a community of power users, because we had to get the message out in terms of how to use this product within PSPC. And because there was no time to basically get everybody fully trained and so on, we created a community of power users, and that made a huge difference. So basically doing a kind of a grassroots movement to get people to onboard and let those power users within the program areas become the centers of excellence and the places to ask your questions. And from there, we were able to sort of implement that change widely across PSPC, which, by the way, has about 19,000 users. So we're a fairly large department. Challenge number two, the ugly duckling number two, is this is not a cheap product. You know, yes, SSE negotiated an enterprise agreement with Microsoft. It was based on a certain number of heads, if you want, or bums and seats at a particular point in time. The GC had grown since that baseline had been established. So right there, it created financial pressures. But the licensing is ironically is a small fraction of the overall cost of implementing a product like this. There's the change management, there's the entire support model, there's the project itself, how to implement this, working with SSE and other partners to actually basically introduce an entirely new offering that otherwise didn't exist, 18 months ago. That's huge, and it's millions and millions and millions of dollars, and millions as well in terms of ongoing support, creating an entire service desk infrastructure and so on. So again, this was an unplanned requirement. There were no funds for this. There was no governance in place to tap into to basically prioritize this over something else. So that created chaos in terms of, you know, how do we pay for this? How do we just risk manage the expenditure and so on and so forth? Do we hire people on a permanent basis? Do we just hire them on a temporary basis? Do we even know what kind of structure we need? So it was exceptionally bumpy, and arguably it continues to be bumpy from that perspective. But we did put some things in place. So Amy, why don't you tell us a little bit about what we did do about the problems I just described?
Well, first of all, we were very lucky because we had 2 DGs, JF was one of them, and 2 directors, one on a project side and one on an operational and business ownership side, that we really had an extraordinarily close working relationship. And we I don't want to say attacked, but we you know, tried to address these challenges head on. There's so many aspects to the governance and the business decisions and the funding. As JF mentioned, we do, as a federal government, we have administrative processes that we have to follow, and project management is one of the, you know, the more important ones. There is a lot of money at stake, and so we have to make sure that we are working on all of the, you know, the project management and under the framework, and seeking approvals for some of the spending authorities and that type of thing. So that was happening, but at the same time, as JF said, we had a real business, like, you know, COVID created that requirement for us to get something up and running really quickly. So as we were moving forward, of course, a project normally brings forward a delta to the organization. And we tried to put together our best estimates of what the project costs and frameworks and schedule and all of those artifacts, and what the operational costs would look like. And there was an operational model put forward, but of course it was the first time we had put it together. We didn't know how accurate it was. And we were continually asked questions like, how can this be a net new service? It must replace things. And when we tried to pull that together, it was very, very difficult, because it was over and above. There were a few things that replaced. So we did retire an old chat program that we had, but really it's a change in roles and responsibilities, sometimes within the department, but for PSPC very much from SSC, for example, and it was very difficult to quantify the savings that we would and what we needed the operational funds for these new roles and responsibilities. So that was one of our challenges, was to get through and get the approvals necessary to move forward. You know, through all of that, with the capital funding, with a number of these types of project approvals that we got, we never, within PSPC, we never were, DSB was not given any additional funds for the operation, for the new team that had to be built. It was absorbed completely within DSB. And, you know, because of some of the recent, you know, financial and budgets, we've actually, as we mentioned, we've had to really change how we're implementing things in the project, because when the project delivers something into the operation has to be able to receive it and support it. So there's three kind of prongs that we have within PSPC that has brought about a lot of this change. One of them is that we do have an agreement with SSC that provides our first level and our desktop services. And as well, of course, we have the project and then the operation. So we really have to work together to bring forward many of these, and I'm talking more about the project decisions now, which are more the technical decisions. This is still a work in progress, because typically it's really hard to get a business owner of a corporate and an enterprise tool like this. So when you have something that it's cloud-based, it's desktop, and it impacts every user, we really don't have we don't have the utopia yet of how we make enterprise decisions in PSPC. There's one tenant, we all have to live in it, and we can put together recommendations, we can bring them forward, but we don't have an enterprise business owner of the project. And so it's something that we tried from very early on. So we had project decisions, we had business decisions, and then of course we had the funding. And so we do have, as I said, we've been successful, and so far we haven't brought anything to its knees. But certainly if you were to ask me, do we have sort of that documented golden bullet of how this stuff happens on a standard repeatable way, I'd have to say no.
Yeah, no, thank you, Amy. And I think, I mean, I think the last bullet on what was done is probably one of the most important ones. Is we have basically throttled back what we're releasing. We have not released all of the capabilities of 365 because we don't have internal capacity to be able to support that. So we did prioritize what was most important, and we've released what we think brings the highest value for the entirety of the enterprise and aligns well with what other departments are doing. But there's other really nifty features that do unlock other value that still remains locked up because we don't have capacity. And we are working on business cases to get secure funding necessary to support that in the long term. So thank you. So I'm just looking at the time. We're chewing through the hourglass here, so we'll probably pick up the pace a little bit. So the next one was information management. No big surprise there. PSPC in its heyday was a bit of a gold standard from an IM perspective. They expended a tremendous amount of energies to get off things like shared drives and so on. While shared drives are still there, they're much more regulated than they once were. Regions spent lots and lots of effort to get all their holdings into GC docs and so on. Now imagine, we're through the implementation of 365. We're implementing a whole new set of information management channels, if you wish, that are ungoverned. We have the OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams chats with no expiry, et cetera, et cetera. So you can imagine the anxiety and the angst that causes our colleagues in the information management space, as well as legal, right? So e-discovery, legal hold, and that's the tension between, we have IM people who want to auto dispose of everything, but then we have our lawyers who say you need to legal hold everything, because PSPC rather is subject to lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, and so legal hold is something near and dear to us. So we have to be careful not to delete things that could have a value from a legal perspective. And so again here, I think this one is still a nut that we're trying to crack. I know that Amy, you can tell us very quickly, what some of the things that we are doing to try to address some of these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is one that everybody can relate to. There's many conversations that have happened for the past few years on this one. As JF mentioned, we are heavy users of GC Docs. It's already implemented. And so very early on for the project, we set up a number of working groups to address a number of project deliverables. IM was a big one. So up until now, with teams and channels, we have not spent a lot of time. I shouldn't say that. We've spent a lot of time talking about it, but it's not sort of come to the crunch, because we have our philosophy has been that M365 is for transitory information and everything gets moved back to GC Docs. And so we do have retention periods set up and so on. The challenge with this one is that at PSPC, IM has really focused on GC Docs for the EDRMS. They haven't really been involved in setting SharePoint up with the IM component of it, nor has my operational team on the M365 really had a corporate decision on how we're going to manage IM within M365. We're at a crossroads right now where we really are trying to figure out, okay, what does PSPC want to be when it grows up as far as information management, and where are we going to go with this? Because going back to the previous slide, if we start managing IM in GC Docs and in M365 or SharePoint Online, it does take resources to maintain it, both from an IM perspective and from an operational perspective. And so actually just this week, we've got some meetings at the DG level to talk about that, so that we're not making commitments on how we're going to manage this environment in its entirety without making sure that it's the direction that we want to go, at least in, as we can see right now. So we do have one tenant, everybody has to live in it. We're trying to figure out how to incorporate it. JF, as the business owner, has some operational things he wants to do with M365 moving forward in terms of how we manage the desktop. And we are involved in more to come on SharePoint, but we do need to settle on this and have an enterprise decision in terms of where we want to go with IM. And anything that we do needs to be doable in the future. It needs to be something realistic that we can actually manage. And we also need a roadmap of what we're going to do in the short and the medium and the longer term to make sure that everybody, there's too many impacts to it, as JF has already described, that we need to make sure that we have an integrated roadmap.
Thank you, Amy. Yep, this is a very important topic and certainly not an easy nut to crack, that's for sure. Thank you. So going on then to challenge number 4 is, because this was going so quickly, time was of the essence. There was no time. We talked a lot about governance earlier. So here, there was a lot of stakeholders. Amy alluded to it earlier, security, information management, procurement, project oversight, project governance. These were all organizations, stakeholders that were engaged. But at the end, these organizations typically require long lead times in order to do things, in order to render decisions, in order to provide their subject matter expertise guidance. And time was not something that we had. So sort of, I may not ask Amy to answer on this one, because I think we've kind of addressed this one. The only thing that I think what we did do here is Amy and I together ended up making lots of decisions based on risk-based and common sense. Risk-based discussions and common sense, because we had to move forward. And I think we often talk in the GC about failing fast and allowing ourselves to make mistakes, but I think nothing could be truer than this particular slide, in that we did allow ourselves to make mistakes, and we wouldn't punish ourselves for making the wrong decision, because our decisions were made with the right intention. And any decisions that were perhaps slightly erroneous, we were able to very rapidly course correct. Fortunately, the 364 platform is a very malleable platform, and therefore we were able to make adjustments on the fly, and that's what we did. And we did at the same time continue to consult with the stakeholders for the longer term subject matter expertise consultations. So then moving on to, this is a very big one. So this one here, this one's a bit controversial, and Microsoft is probably in the audience, so I don't mean, this is not meant to be a diss to Microsoft, but there was a statement made that I retained that made by Microsoft. I'm not sure, I don't remember who, but saying, the 365 platform is the most accessible platform in the world. That's a very strong statement, and that one stuck. And I do believe that Microsoft, one of their strategic imperatives is in fact accessibility, and I do think it is truly an awesome accessible tool. But when statements like that are made, it creates these almost impossible expectations. And so when we implemented this product, all of the accessibility people were almost looking to break it, to prove that to prove that it wasn't as accessible as the ultimate platinum standard that's worldwide famous for. So anyway, so I think, and also from a translation perspective, this shocked the whole translation capabilities from French to English and English to French. The AI instruments that are embedded within 365 were a little shocking and threatening to the Translation Bureau. And Translation Bureau, if for those who don't know, is actually a very large part of PSPC. PSPC, it delivers translation services to the GC. So again, this was a bit of a shock to the system, saying, geez, is this a threat to our business model? So as a result, maybe Amy, you can talk a little bit about the accessibility and translation and what that meant for us and what we did about it.
Yeah, so they were part of official languages, and accessibility, of course, were a big part of the project and the reviews that we do. And that's really it, JF, is that they were looking for something that would, be 100% compliant or really close. And there were some things that weren't on both sides. And so the approach that we took was we were going to take every tool, every strategy at our disposal, and make sure that we were aware of it, that we were using it, so that when we did offer documentation for users, when we had any service that we were making available, that everything that could be used to facilitate these things that we were using. And we keep in very close touch with the testing, with the tools that we do have in use for compliancy, and making sure that they're up to date, so that the readers and so on are working as well as it can, and that we are using all the tools that are at our disposal. And again, I'm going to talk about SharePoint in late, but that's in the next slide, but that certainly is a big piece of it.
Perfect. Thank you. Yes, thank you very much. Good. So then moving on then to our before last challenge, so change management. So again, here there was a lot of focus around technology, but there was a lack of focus around what this meant for the business. What are the opportunities that this suite present in terms of transforming how program areas conduct their everyday work and deliver services to their respective clients? And so I think this is more future looking, but what are we doing about that, Amy, right now?
Well, we have many different types of changes that are happening, and we're really documenting them. As you said, the technical change, that tends to be the easy one, but we're still learning too as we go. We thought about the roles and responsibilities. Now, in our situation, it may be different than some other departments, but certainly with SSC and us, and within DSB, what roles that we play are changing. We're still adjusting. And what does that mean for teams and budgets and funding and so on? And the business change. These are the types of things that we're trying to get out through the power users. We're trying to get out into the business, because yes, the platform has changed. Yes, the technology has changed, and it's opening up new opportunities to do things in a different way. But in order for us to really take advantage of what the tool provides to us, the business really has to take a look at the business processes. And, if you read all that good information out there about digital government, you can't take manual, outdated, inefficient processes and digitize them. It doesn't work that way. And so we are seeing a little bit of that, but I don't feel like we've really got that penetration into the organization to really have the business start looking at how they do things and even how we offer services to other government departments. So this is certainly one of our challenges moving forward, is adjusting our technical roles and responsibilities, adjusting the business, and in many ways, adjusting how all of our stakeholders within PSPC work as this moves forward. Things like official languages, things like accessibility and security. License management is another big one. You know, we have pretty straightforward fee structures for user licensing, for example, but how do we manage the Power Apps and all of those linkages and the cloud? These are all things that we're still learning about. We still don't really understand it, and we don't know what we need to manage those types of things moving forward. So that's just an example of some of the internal change management that we have to do.
That's right. Thank you, Amy. And I guess one other dimension to this is that it gives us a taste of what's to come as well. Teams, for example, is something that changes almost weekly. There's a new release that happens that's not that there's no RFC, no request for change that's managed within the PSPC. It just sort of Microsoft kind of just releases new features every day or addresses fixes bugs. They don't consult departments, which is perfect, right? That's just the way the world works nowadays. That's not how we were before. So you know, we can't prepare a user guide today because tomorrow what the screenshot that's in the user guide may not be relevant. So it's also disrupting the role of IT and the role and having people understand that their products, their suites, the tools that they're using today, they're malleable. They're going to change. They continue. They're in a constant state of change and evolution, and that requires a new mindset for the consumer of that service. So we're all being disrupted to a certain extent. The final challenge, one that is another difficult nut to crack, and one that I know keeps Amy up at night a lot, is we're a big SharePoint user. We have been for many years, and we're heavily invested in 2013. Obviously, with 365, SharePoint Online is our end state, though not everything needs to go to SPO. So we're trying to figure out, and we have thousands and thousands and thousands of holdings held within our SharePoint. And that creates, so the SharePoint Online brings tremendous opportunity to PSPC, but it's a head scratcher in terms of what do we do about how do we move from 2013 to online. So Amy, maybe you can talk a little bit about that nightmare that you keep reliving day in, day out on SharePoint 2013.
Well, I think the challenge here is that SharePoint Online is called SharePoint, but it really, you might as well think that it's a different tool. And folks are thinking it's the same, but it's really very different, and it works in very different ways. And so we are really literally just going through this right now. And so I don't really have how we're going to resolve it completely, but we do have to get off SharePoint 2013. We've been using SharePoint 2013 in the before time for sharing OneNotes. So we have that, we have some collaboration sites, we have some custom applications, and we have MySource, our intranet on SharePoint 2013. So we are moving off of it. Obviously, it's end of life. And what we're doing is we're moving it into M365. Now, the challenge to that is that collaboration happens very differently in M365. You not necessarily do things the same way. So you need to help people change the way they're collaborating in an old environment to a new environment. So our services are changing. However, at the technology level, there are changes in SharePoint Online. There's decisions that need to be made that are very different, and the use of it is very different as well. So we do have a project set up. We're moving forward. We're working with architecture. We have, we're putting plans in place. We're helping clients to figure out from a business capability perspective, what is it that they want to do and what tool to best use to do that. And then we're moving what belongs in M365 in M365, but it isn't necessarily on, specifically SharePoint, even though SharePoint is the foundation for M365. And because we haven't implemented, as we mentioned earlier, some of the other packages like Yammer, some of these things, so we don't have that tool for the capability. And so we're trying again to build that integrated roadmap so that we can be helping clients choose what is the right tool for the right capability and the right functionality that they need. Keeping in mind that the nature of PSPC's business is serving other government departments. So another big challenge for us is how do we use SharePoint and M365 to collaborate across the government with other government departments in both an unclassified and a protected B environment. So we're implementing and we're moving through that and putting the plans together at the same time. So, we do have a hard date for SharePoint 2013, but it's not a simple migration project. There's a lot of aspects to it to do it in a right way that ends up with clients being able to do what they need to do in a standard way and moving PSPC forward to consolidating and moving away from custom apps and more to the cloud and more to those standards that we actually want to be using.
Perfect. Thank you, Amy. Yep, this is a tough one, but I think there is end in sight. I can see light at the end of the tunnel. So finally, the Swan. Regardless of those 7 challenges in that ugly duckling that we've been describing throughout the past 35 minutes, both Amy and I are fervent believers that there is a swan in the end. It is growing. That ugly duckling is transforming and is turning into a beautiful swan. We have the APM, application portfolio management, so that's our inventory of something like 400 applications here at PSPC. We already have sites on we've already decommissioned several apps, and we continue to decommission apps in lieu and replacing them with 365 capabilities. That has started. We already have basically applications decommissioned with many more sort of on the horizon. So our technical debt, as they keep saying, the big buzzword of the past 2 years, is on the decline as a result. Resources have been reduced to a certain extent, and we are moving towards an M365 product management sort of model, and it is working. Business lines are starting to recognize the value of the capabilities that 365 brings, and some of the more keener organizations, the more tech-savvy program areas, have actually moved some of their businesses into process automation, into external collaboration, so that the early adopters are starting to basically pathfind for the less tech savvy organizations. So you can see there is a change, a metamorphosis that's happening. Power BI is on the rise. Our consumption of Power BI across PSPC is at record highs, which tells me that people are starting to use that platform as to basically make business decisions to a far greater extent than they ever have in the history of PSPC. We are what Amy and I, the conversation that Amy and I are having with business leaders across PSPC is completely different. We're no longer the order takers. We're talking about the capabilities of 365 in the context of their business and what they can do. Because of the Power Automate and Power Platforms that we're starting to experiment with, some of the early adopters are starting to basically do some R&D and starting to take the ideas that they have and implement them right away. So that agility is starting to come into play. And Amy just today announced to me that I think it's NRC or NRCan, I think it's NRC, National Research Council, they've opened their tenant to us and we're open to them so that we can now start collaborating. So more and more departments are starting to flatten and open up their tenants to each other. And now we're starting to collaborate in a way that we've never done before. So the GC is starting to operate as a single enterprise. But I use daily frictionless interactions among public servants. We are becoming one GC. There are no more departmental barriers. We are all public servants serving basically Canadians and our politicians. So I believe the Swan is arriving. It's still in a metamorphing state, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. And so I hope this presentation resonated with some of you. I hope it wasn't too dark, and I hope you do see that we are all going in the right direction. And I hope this was helpful to all of you. So Silvana, Barry, back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, JF. Thank you, Amy. What a fantastic presentation. I'm so happy you chose to take the approach that you did, because I think so many times it is easy to see that swan and want to present on the swan, right? And want to tell the clean, put together, tied together with a bow story, and we can gloss over those challenges very easily once we kind of see that swan in sight. But I'm sure there's a lot of heads being nodded on other sides of computers, because I think a lot of departments, a lot of people in your positions at different departments have either gone through the same things or see those challenges on the horizon. So I know that there's probably a lot of notes being taken, or at least points being stored for later. There is a little bit of time to still submit questions for everyone on the line, so definitely feel free to get your questions in here. But let me get started. And yes, sorry, I should include this in my intro slides. The presentation will be available afterwards. Orangutech posts the presentations on our YouTube channel, so we'll make sure that that's sent out to everyone after probably this week sometime. So, are you looking to assign business owners to the tools within M365? For example, the approvals app would be in finance, etc.
Let me take a kick at it, and then I'll pass it over to Amy, because we've been thinking a lot about this. So I've kind of taken the business ownership of the whole product suite right now, but it's far too big for me to be able to manage on my own. And so yes, I believe we are, depending on the actual capabilities of the specialized capability of the particular feature in question, we are looking to devolve that business ownership to certain niche program areas. So to your point, if there's a financial app within the 365 platform, it would make sense to basically make that business owner the CFO. Power BI is one that we're going to be looking to probably transfer to our business analytics center of expertise, for example. Right now it's me, but that I'm going to be looking to devolve that. So slowly but surely, I will basically try to shed some of the large business ownership that I have, because it doesn't make sense. I can't be an expert in everything. Amy, did you want to add to that?
The only thing that I would add is that my relationship with corporate communications and with our IT communications folks has never been closer. The challenge that we have is, what are the roles and responsibilities, and how and what does a business owner of these applications mean? There's definitely some natural fits, but our challenge is in order for us to have a business owner and have them require and draw a roadmap for what their roles are and how we move forward with these various tools in terms of implementation and evolution, there has to be some operational resources and money and funding attached. And so those are all the more complicated things, I think, to work out, because it's no sense in identifying a business owner who's going to ask for something that we can't afford to do. And so again, yes, we have product managers, just so you know, we have product managers that are looking to make sure over the course of the evolution of the product that it works and it's moving in the direction that the client wants it to move in. But we've started to explore the business ownership issue, but I think we have to think it through a little bit more and be realistic about what really it means.
Great, thank you. Curiosity around how large is the M365 team at PSPC? How are they set up within the organization?
I'll let Amy answer that one because it's her team.
So right now we have, I can't tell you the exact number, but if you reach out, I can definitely make all of our documentation available for sure. I'm going to say it's about 20, maybe less, a little bit less than that. We have an entire concept of operations with an org chart attached. It is not the full complement of what was recommended, which is why we've sort of we've had to pause and slow down a little bit on the implementation of the project, because there are project deliverables that are coming forward, obviously, that get handed over to the operation, but in the day-to-day operation and evolution of the service, there are also deliverables that we're responsible for. And so I'm really trying to balance things that are coming from the project as well as the things now that our team is responsible for. So, you know, as we have capacity, we certainly move and try to take them on and try to move things forward. But we really, again, we're being very practical about it in not making promises that we can't keep. And we have a few big things coming. We haven't done MFA and mobile yet, for example. And so that's a bit of a question mark in terms of how many resources, as an example, that will take. And so that all of these things we're going through for the first time, and we want to make sure that the clients have a good experience. And that's really what's number one for us. So that's going to be the priority for making sure that we've got the resources in place to support clients. And that, I think, is going to be a bit high maintenance on the MFA and mobile side. It's going to be high maintenance, especially to get it implemented.
Amazing, thank you. And Amy, how did you go about training your IT staff, your IT employees, to make sure that they were equipped and prepared for this move to the cloud?
Oh my God, you want me to say like we did something really smart and intelligent, don't you? But I have to say we didn't. I mean, I don't have a silver bullet there. We do a lot of Googling, and we do a lot of, as I mentioned earlier, we've got SSC, we've got Microsoft, and we've got other government departments, and we've got, you know, Google and YouTube. And so we've done a series of certified courses. And so we're trying to do that, but I have to say that it is very difficult to keep up. It's very difficult to keep up with the technology. It's very difficult to keep up with the dependencies like our cloud, how it relates to Azure and the services, all of the desktop. It's very difficult to keep up with that. And I would say part of it is we've lost control of the releases that come out, and even the new features in terms of training our staff and our engineering for testing some of these things. That definitely has been, and we mentioned it earlier in the slide, the change management, the internal change management, as it's specifically related to training, is something that's ongoing. And folks have to find the time that it takes to do the ongoing training that's required, because things do change quickly.
Great, thank you. That would actually be an interesting topic in itself for one of these council meetings. If there's anyone in the audience that would like to present on just training the IT teams as a whole and keeping up with those updates and keeping up with everything that we need to as we continue on this journey to the cloud, I think that would be a really, really interesting one. So I throw that out there to all 100 of you and challenge one of you to step up and present in the upcoming new year on this topic. That brings us to a minute left in our presentation today. So I just wanted to take the time to thank both of you again, JF and Amy, for presenting. Like I said, an awesome take on your journey to M365. We will be sharing the presentation on our YouTube channel. Wait for an email in your inbox to get that link. And like I said, we want to build a lineup for next year's council meetings, next calendar year council meetings. So feel free to reach out if you have a topic you want to present on. If you have any questions, we're here for you. Everyone, enjoy your December, enjoy your holiday season, and we'll see all of you in the new year. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.